For my film festival, I'd choose to do an exploration of violence in regard to cultural relevance to the country of the film's origin. This can include factors such as past events, the people, organisations and gangs alike, being legitimate and illegitimate, religion and recreation within the country. I'd probably set it up similar to the Sydney Underground Film Festival. This may be similar to the Melbourne Underground Film Festival, but I've only attended the Sydney one, so I'm more familiar with that. With the Sydney Underground Film Festival, they hold it in Marrickville in Sydney, which has a lot of rundown warehouses that have been refurbished and abandoned buildings, being a past industrial area. The reason for choosing a setup like similar to this would be using a refurbished warehouse gives that gritty, small cinema kind of grindhouse vibe, which a lot of these movies were released in, or probably would have suited releasing in if they were released more into the future than what the 70s were. Pretty much adding on that, I'd choose that for the gritty grindhouse feel. And it also allows for small, intimate crowds, which suit the environment with a lot of the more extreme films. One that I would have chosen would have been the French New Wave extremist one, Martyrs, which watching within like a small group doesn't quite have the same impact, whereas if you've got like a small crowd or over a larger crowd, you have that you get the same kind of emotion from everyone and things like that, so I think that really suits. My demographic I'd choose would be across both genders, consisting of film students, film buffs, fans of cult cinema and violent cinema, and basically like you probably get walk-ins off the street as well, because it's not only extreme and cult films, there's also ones that are more probably across a wider demographic, which I'll probably speak about earlier and I'll mention it then. My main film that I was going to feature was the Japanese cult hit Battle Royale, which was released in 1999 and directed by Kinji Fukasaku. It was adapted from the 1997 novel of the same name, which was written by Kushin Takami. Basically, it's set in a not too distant dystopian Japan, where the economy has crashed to a degree and the severe unemployment rate's up to around 15%, and youth delinquency is at an all-time high. For example, in the film it shows where the students are basically running wild in the corridors, and one of the teachers who actually becomes the runner of Battle Royale for that year is stabbed in the leg by a student. So basically we follow Class B, who are a group of school students who are selected for this year's Battle Royale. They're forced onto an island and given 3 days to kill each other off with an array of weapons and basically test their trust, their skills, and if there's more than one left on the last day, when the time's up, they all die. So basically it's just up to one winner. I found that this drew a lot of influence from 90s Japan, as the book was written in the 90s. This time was known as the Lost Decade. It was an era when Japan went into recession for the first time since a massive economic boom after World War II. So there was a fall in the basically the value of assets in Japan. So anyone who had investments basically lost a heap of money, which of course led to loss of jobs and a heightened unemployment rate. There was also a few changes in laws, not related to the recession, but related to youth-related events. So, for example, there was the Kobe murders in 1997, in which a 14-year-old boy was charged with murdering a 10 and 11-year-old, quite brutally as well. This led to the Japanese government changing the legal responsibility age from 16 to 14, which meant there was more responsibility put on children than before for basically their actions where they're trying to act like adults. This is also similar to the Ministry of Education's decision to reduce study time and other schooling laws, basically to give students a zest for life, similar to Battle Royale, where they're in a more extreme case where they're forcing kids to kill each other so that actually, if they survive, they'll cherish life even more. But in this case, they're giving them more time for recreation and to chill out and things like that. And if they didn't take study more seriously after this, they were then punished with things like community service and military service time for an extended period that wasn't actually specified. It also reflects the director Fukasaku's ideals, as he grew up in a time in World War II. Basically, he almost served on the front line, but luckily for him the war ended about 2 weeks before it was meant to be shipped out. But he had the ideal of his generation, which was brought up during this wartime, developed a camaraderie and friendship that was bonded through violence, which basically developed like a lifelong friendship and also like a greater trust within each other. And then you saw in the newer generations like the 90s, which I grew up in, there was basically like no patriotism. They seemed lazy and just really didn't care about getting out there and making the best out of themselves. So this was kind of, he chose to adapt this book mainly for that reason. And basically my final thing on Battle Royale is, as well as having this Japanese culture embedded into it, it's also been highly influential on Hollywood cinema. Obviously there's films like The Hunger Games, The Condemned, which I think has Stone Cold Steve Austin the wrestler in it, and there's a couple of other ones which obviously have high influence from Battle Royale, where it takes a bunch of characters made to kill each other off in slightly different circumstances, Battle Royale, but essentially has the same themes to it. But probably a big one is Quentin Tarantino. He's named this as his favourite film of the last 20 years since, well, it's probably a bit over 20 years now because The Interview was released a few years ago. It was basically since his time when Reservoir Dogs was released, in between that time. He found that his favourite film, and you can basically see his influence in this in films like Kill Bill, with the Japanese side of it, with the similar blood splatter and erratic camera work. He also has actress Chikai Kuriyama, who plays Gogo Yubari in Kill Bill. She also plays Takako Chigusa in Battle Royale. Both characters have a very similar style, where they both have a strong hate for men, so they're a strong feminist figure, and they also like to play sadistic games to lure in their victims, such as basically playing the silly Dixie style of girl, which men are often lured into, as it seems to portray. Some other films I would have chosen, Australian film Romper Stomper, which was released in 1992, directed by Jeffrey Wright. It basically deals with the downfall of an Australian skinhead gang, and the themes run around skinhead gangs of the 80s within blue-collar Melbourne suburbia, which, like in the film, they terrorised a lot of Melbourne. In fact, Hondo, who's Russell Crowe's character, who's pretty much the main character, he's based on an Australian skinhead named Dane Sweetman. I couldn't find out, but I'm pretty sure he's released now, but he was serving a life sentence in prison from the late 80s. He'd done a lot of things like firebombing synagogues and things like that, but he was finally arrested for actually killing a fellow skinhead with an axe at a celebration for Hitler's birthday. There's actually a quote from Dane Sweetman within the film where Hondo Crowe's character comes into a squatter's building, which is actually he lives in. It's been taken over by other squatters, and he threatens to cut their legs off. This actually comes from an event where Dane Sweetman actually cut someone's legs off, which he was later arrested for in part of the charging for all of his crimes. The script itself, Jeffrey Wright, the director, wanted to actually interview Sweetman, but unfortunately couldn't due to prison regulations at the time, but was instead given a transcript of his trial. So a lot of that was actually based on Sweetman. Also, in some ways, looking at the cultural side of this once again, it raises some of the issues present in second and third generation Vietnamese as well, where it shows that, like, although their parents may have like a nice legitimate business that they've worked for ages, a lot of the young ones have turned to gangs to basically find something to do and try and find some identity within their culture and within their new culture that they were coming to, being Australia. Moving on from this, also I would have included the New Zealand film Once Were Warriors. Was released in 1994, directed by Lee Tamahor. It basically deals with Maori cultural displacement within the modern age after being such a strong warrior race for so long. We see, basically, it focuses mainly on the men, in Jake the Muss being the main character. It deals with poverty, with the men who never really had to work in these past generations that the warrior class have grown up with. So there's poverty from that. To deal with their cultural displacement, they revert to alcoholism, with men gathering together as a group, as they would have back as a warrior during their warrior times. together as men, and then also domestic violence with, once again, being a warrior race, they would be prone to violence and things like that, and it shows the outburst of that and the effect on the family. And it has very strong themes of displacement within the Maori culture. So using those two as examples, they're both cult hits within themselves, but they also have popularity within, especially Australia in this region. So you may, as I said with the demographic, you may get people who enjoy this film and they may just turn up rather than being a film buff or something like that. And then finally, the last one I actually included in the written up assignment was Men of the Sun, which is based on Unit 731 of the Japanese Imperial Army during World War II. They were basically, although not as many people know about them, they were probably as bad as the Nazis. They were huge with human experimentation. In the film, most of the deaths and torture portrayed actually happened in real life. And the name escapes me, but the person who ran it, the general, he actually ended up escaping charges due to some American law loophole. But some of the things that are in the film that were in real life there's one scene where there's experimentation on frostbite on a woman. She's put out in the elements and basically has cold water poured on her repeatedly, and then they try and thaw her out and do different things to try and basically see how frostbite can be treated, because during World War II, the Japanese fighting the Soviets up in Russia obviously were very prone to frostbite. And yeah, so that's another choice in my film. Obviously being a cult one, I'd heard of it before but didn't know much about it, so I went out to research that, and I found that it would be actually really good. Just trying to cover all basic bases. I should also add that my camera ran out of recording time, so I have had to add this bit in. My film choices came from a bit of a range of ones that I didn't really know, and others that I've been a long time fan of, and some that I've only discovered since I've become more of a film fan in the last few years. Obviously Romper Stomper and Once the Warriors being a little more well known, I'd actually grown up watching. My dad was huge fans of them, so I've discovered them at a fairly young age, probably about 12, maybe a little too young, but don't really care. Battle Royale I discovered probably when I was about 17 or 18, so that's about 3 or 4 years ago now, when I started to get more into cult films and violent films and become a general film buff. But I found it was a good choice because not only did it reflect my themes, if it was within my film festival, it's something that those that have seen it are often long-time lovers of the film as being a very big cult hit, but then those who haven't seen it, it's a shocking new discovery, and it can actually, I found for me, from there I went on to a lot of like Takeshi Miike movies and a lot of that really extreme Eastern cinema. So it's kind of like a gateway into a whole new world for those that haven't seen things like that before. So I felt it was kind of relevant in that way, being not only culturally influenced by Japanese culture, but also being, as I said with Tarantino, being able to influence Western culture as well. Other films such as probably Martyrs, I've seen it once, about a year ago now, so I'm still fairly hazy with it, so I still had to go and research it a lot and basically get more background information to see if it would suit my festival. Children of the Sun I'd seen on like Extreme List, but I didn't really know anything about it at all. I went and researched it and found that because of the historical background of it, it worked a lot differently to a lot of the other films, and upon researching it, I found that it fitted a lot of my criteria pretty perfectly. So yeah, there was a bit of a range from ones I'd been very familiar with to ones I had to actually go out and research. But yeah, basically that's my presentation. If there's any questions, shoot me an email, or I'll provide my number in the email and you can give me a call. Yeah, thanks.